to Refuge Tonight. This is Pastor Brent here with a special panel tonight. I have with me Adrian, Coach Kelly, and Talia, and we are going to be talking on the topic of racism and race and race relations in America right now. On May 25th, George Floyd, you all have all seen video or pictures of the incident that happened, and I really believe this. I believe that that racism and some of the struggles that we're seeing right now, it's not like they weren't there before that day.
Exactly.
It's almost like if you think of like there's a tub of water, you know, that you're filling up, and then you just put in a little bit more and it can spill over if it's all the way to the brim. I really believe that's the way it is. And so when there's moments where we see it up close and personal, stuff just begins to spill over. And so we know that it spills over onto social media. It spills over into different probably conversations that you're having right now with your friends and your family. And so we wanted to be a part of that conversation with you. Because we're all processing and looking to God for answers about how we can be part of the solution. And so I also want to start off tonight and just have these three introduce themselves and just like why did you guys want to be a part of this? I know I asked you if you'd be a part of this little panel and this discussion, but why did you say yes? Because there were some people that said no. So why did you say yes, and why do you want to be here tonight talking about this subject?
Well, my name's Adrian, obviously.
Adrian.
For me, I just feel like silence isn't the answer. I just feel like you can't just sweep these issues just under a rug and hope that they'll go away. I think it's important to engage in a dialogue, but dialogue needs to lead to action, and there are many different ways to do that. I think that's the toughest part that I've been struggling with is what exactly to do, and I've been trying to read stuff about it, and there's not one solution, but I do feel like for me, it starts with me, and then individually, it starts with all of us first for doing something, and speaking out and addressing these issues and standing up for people or standing beside people, because I know a lot of times in the Black community, we don't want you to speak for us, but just be present and be with us and let us know that you have our support and that you're willing to fight for what's right.
Yeah. My name's Kelly Barkle, and I'm very excited to be here because I do want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. For me, growing up, I grew up outside of Cincinnati and in a school from elementary through high school that was very black and white. And through the 70s, I graduated in 1987. So I was a part of riots. I started riots. I've seen, my friends get stabbed, by a person of color. And so growing up, I was very prejudiced, very racist, not in church at all. And all my friends were. I mean, the black kids at my school, I never felt real safe most of the time around most people of color, and was beaten up, many times, jumped, ganged, and all that. But also, all my white friends. I felt like none of them really liked people of color either. I mean, especially down deep. Sometimes on the surface, it might look like they both did. And so then I met Christ when I was 18 years old. And at 18, God radically changed my life. Yeah. And I mean, I just felt like I loved everybody, and I want everybody to know I loved them. And I mean, you could punch me 10 times, and I'd be like, I love you, I love you. And so I had thought for a long, long time, man, I'm a Christian, I love people, and man, I had black friends, and everything, and all of that. And then a few years ago, Kaepernick kneels and does that, and I just remember through that whole thing thinking, man, that is stupid. Why would you do that? And I love you, you black, and I love you, but man, I hate that you're doing that. And then a year later or something, Black Lives Matters. And I got, honestly, I immediately said, come on, say it with me. All lives matter. I mean, because I'm a white Christian,
right?
Right. And I didn't get it. And I hate that I didn't get it. until a few years ago, just a couple years ago, and God's been working on my heart that, man, I'm sorry that I didn't get it then, because of how that perspective that gave to my black and brown friends.
Yeah.
And so now I want to be here now to say, man, I'm on that side, and I'm going to stand, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to be beside you, behind you. I'll go in front of you and block, if I got to, but I'm not going to sit around and be silent anymore. I'm going to do something, and I'm going to have great enough relationships with my black and brown friends to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So that's me.
And I'll just say this on what Kelly said there about not getting it right away. And that might be you right now. Maybe a lot of stuff doesn't make sense to you, and maybe you have some real negative feelings about certain people. And I just want you to know that wherever you're at, we just want you to be open to what God wants to do in your heart. And the hope we have is throughout history, Christians haven't got it. Like, they've been really slow to get it, and it's taken time. Like, even some of like big hero kind of Christians, people of the faith, didn't get it right away, and had to be like even corrected and rebuked at times by others who could see that in their lives. And so that's all of us. None of us are at a point where all of a sudden we've arrived. Like, hopefully 5 years from now we'll look back and say, man, I didn't get it then. Like, I should have got more. But
I mean, if there's like a scale and this is 0 and this is 10, and 10 is like total complete racial reconciliation,
right?
If everybody watching, if you're a 5 right now and you can move to a 6, or if you're a 1 and move to a 10, if you're a 7 can move to an 8, then I think we'll have done something great today.
Yeah. And so Talia's here representing our students again this week. Yeah. She was so awesome last week. We said bring her back. So Talia, tell us a little bit about you.
All right. So obviously I'm Talia. I was asked to come here, and I was like, awesome. Like, I've already been pushing this on social media, so I might as well. But when I was growing up, well, obviously I'm mixed, as you can see, but when I was growing up, I've also experienced what it's like to be on both sides of not having, let's say, privilege and having privilege, because me and my sister, we were definitely treated differently because we were either not black enough or white enough, or we were black for some people and white for some people, or people just saw us as mixed. And I definitely know what it's like for people to go over and say, I'm on this side when it comes to these things, or I'm on this side when it comes to these things, because I've experienced both. And for instance, being with my dad, it was way different being with him than it was being with my mom. And I can say that I have enough privilege to speak out for people who can't speak out for themselves. And that's why I wanted to be here and I guess push that also.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's awesome. I just want to start off tonight too, just kind of ground this in scripture. And 1 John 4:20 says, if someone says, I love God, but hates a fellow believer, that person's a liar. For if we don't love people who we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see? And to me, that's really where this is all at, is that a relationship with God, it's not just vertical, like we all know that, right? Like, there's that aspect, 100%, but there's this horizontal aspect, and it's not just the people that are like us, that look like us, that have the same background as us. We're all God's children. And so, like, we say stuff like, you matter to God, you matter to us, there's nothing you can do to change that. That's because that's rooted in Scripture. That we're called to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, strength, and love our neighbor. That means love everyone, as Jesus would show us in the story of the Good Samaritan. It means everybody, especially people that don't look like you. They run hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other.
And that's easy to say, and it's easy to comprehend that. And then at the same time, when I look at Jesus and I look at like story after story, even though love everybody equal, like, there's just no denying, though, that he was more proactive for the underdog, for the marginalized, for those who were looked at lower than others. I mean, love God, love people. However, like in his actions, he was always quicker to stand up for somebody who was kind of
An outcast.
Yeah, an outcast.
Or an underdog, or not the majority,
Yeah.
not the privileged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially in this case, loving other people when it deals with like race, when you decide to stand up, there could be consequences, and I feel like that's why people kind of shy away from it. I mean, if you look back at the '60s when like those like white people who decided to join in like the protest and march, there were consequences like, they were being called out, by people who look like them too.
Right.
And obviously for black people who decided to stand up against injustice at that time, just all the horrible things that were going on, to us at that time. So, I mean, to even like, to love people who look like me, it's in circumstances like this, I just want to say it's tough to do, but it's the right thing to do. And sometimes doing the right thing is not always easy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's another passage in Micah 6:8 that says, "No, people, the Lord has told you what is good and what He requires of you, and it's to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And so, we're talking about like this is what God wants from us, what He expects for us to do, and we're to do justice, and we're to walk humbly.
mercy.
I think one of the biggest things on when it comes to race kind of things, especially for us as white men, is to have a level of humility, and know that we don't have the same experiences that you all have had, and to understand whether we realize or not, there's been a level of privilege that we've had in our lives that we take so many things for granted, and so. I think it's important that we really spend a lot of time listening and hearing the stories and what others have gone through and go through on a regular basis. If we're going to love well, we need to understand each other.
Absolutely.
And so I just want to start off maybe just asking you guys. So May 25th, this incident happens and it goes viral real quickly and it's all over the place. Tell me about when you guys saw this and what you felt when you saw this first time you saw what happened.
Personally, for me, I actually had to have a friend texted me and was like, "Hey, are you doing okay?" Because I was just so angry. I was like how could this have happened again? Even though I knew obviously it could happen again. It's been happening, but the way that justice was supposedly served by the officer who did this, I was really angry. I was like, it gave a perspective of that could have been like my sisters under that knee. That could have been my cousins under that knee.
Yeah.
And that's actually when the reality hit of this is what people are actually having to go through. And not just that, but people haven't been prosecuted or they got like even put in jail for this. Like I know the officer was put in jail recently, but the other three that were part of the situation, they're nothing. And it brought me back to like Jesus, for example, when he was put on that cross carrying the sins of the world, but also being systematically accused of crimes that he didn't even commit.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they let a literal murderer walk free and let this dude, which also brought me back to the Parkland shooter, when he went over and they caught him. He wasn't tackled. He wasn't any of that stuff. They caught him, brought him back over to the police station, and that was it. But this man who had a fake $20 bill, supposedly fake $20 bill, that died when he could have been alive.
And that can happen to anybody. Like I could have a fake $20 bill and not know it and be passing it off at a store and not have any idea. They say it actually happens a lot. And usually what happens is, I heard an example like a white lady was talking about that happened to her, and they just pulled her aside and said this is a fake bill, and the police came and talked to her for a minute, and she left. nothing happened. And so there's different experiences that people have in similar situations. So one of those things where I hear things that it's like, oh, it makes you cringe a little bit, and it's like you have to be so careful, is when people say things like, well, if you don't want to get in those kind of situations, don't do illegal things and you'll be fine. Remember and realize that a lot of times people who find themselves in these kind of situations haven't even necessarily done anything.
Yeah, and there are like obviously tragedies that have happened where they weren't like, the one guy who was, I can't remember his name, but he was in his apartment and the cop came in thinking it was her apartment.
Yeah,
he wasn't.
Brianna.
There was a Breonna Taylor incident, but then earlier too, like a police officer, that woman who came to that one guy's apartment and shot him up because she thought he was in her apartment.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
And he wasn't. So like
on a different floor.
Yeah, sometimes when these things happen, like nothing illegal is going on, and I feel like that's a much bigger tragedy is the perception, I think like the fear that when people look at certain people, that there is a preconceived notion, and it can lead you to do things because you don't see that like person, even though you don't know that person, you don't see them like they're a human being like you. Like you project, I guess you project your fear on them, and then you want to lash out maybe with violence because you think you need to protect yourself.
Talk about that for a second, guys. So the idea of racism, like most people would not look at themselves and say, I'm a racist, right? Like it's a very small percentage. And most people that would say something like that, they're like actually proud of it. So they're on that really crazy end of the spectrum, right? So most people wouldn't say they're racist, but just the idea of racism, prejudice, where do you think that all comes into play, and what do you think prejudice looks like for a person that would say, oh, I love everybody, I don't see color, right? Like when I look at the world, I don't see color, I'm colorblind, but where does prejudice...
First of all, saying I don't see color and that I'm colorblind, I think is probably one of the worst things somebody can say.
Right, yeah.
Because God made us all different colors, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if Jesus was at Earth right now, he'd be like, hey, Kelly, let's go to Baskin Robbins, because of all the flavors.
Right.
And God loves just all the colors, man. It's just beautiful. But yeah, I mean, because for me, I grew up not just in a home, but in a whole city in a whole state, in Kentucky, but outside of Cincinnati, I think even more. Where, like I said, like the time I was with my friend when he got stabbed because we were riding in a car. We pulled over in a gas station, and there was a white kid that we knew, and he was walking with a black kid. But he always hung out with all the black kids, like all the time. So when we saw him, we said, "Oh, there's a in lover." And so we parked the car, ran around, and my friend was the first one there, and he got stabbed, and I picked him up, put him in the car, and drove him to the hospital. And so that's like my background, that's like what was put in my mind like all the time. And again, like the black people would think the same thing, about us a lot of times in our neighborhood. So even though I became a Christian, and even though I felt like God put love in my heart, like when I soul searched, like the Black Lives Matter thing, I mean, that was a big one for me because I was so gung-ho on all lives matter, and so that prejudice that was still inside of me kept me from getting like, yeah, all lives matter, but look at the lives that seem to not matter very much right now. Right. And it takes like some soul searching to see that prejudice, come out in those different ways.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I kind of forgot the question I was listening to.
Prejudice, where do you think it comes from? Okay. Sometimes I think it's media, movies, the stereotypes, news. You see images in newspapers, and I think you get a preconceived notion by the way someone dresses or the way someone talks because it's so different than your own that you think, okay, I've seen this on the news, and da-da-da. So this, you start to, think this must be who this person is without actually getting to know them.
Prejudging.
Prejudging.
Big
That's
part
a
of
big
it, right?
Yeah.
Prejudice, yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone does it to some level.
Right.
But I just feel like you have to be careful about like when you do it, because one, you just never know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, I feel like, the way you process like whether or not you're in danger or not, but even that can be faulty because you really don't know the other person.
Right.
So
Right.
I feel like it comes from that, but it's become ingrained in us because of images and things that we see in the news and media. So
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like that's made it 1,000 times worse.
And I think I see it in Numbers chapter 12, like early on in the Old Testament, where Numbers chapter 12, and I love the way it's written in the New Living Bible, and Miriam and Aaron says they talk about Moses behind his back because of his Cushite wife in like verse 1. And well, Cushite is from Cush. Cush was Ham's son, and Ham means black, brown, dark skin. And so, Miriam and Aaron talk about Moses behind his back because of his wife, because of the color of his wife. And if you read through chapter 12, you see that God hated that so much, he actually calls it a foolish and senseless sin. And he zaps them with leprosy, by white as snow, because they talked about Moses because of his Cushite wife. And so just that sin of racism and prejudice goes all the way back. And of course, so many places in the New Testament with the Samaritans and things like that. And for the Samaritans in the New Testament, in 582 BC, the Babylonians come and they take the Jewish people and they take them back to their country, and they're there for 70 years. And while they're there, they marry people from the Babylonians, and so they become this beautiful, skin color.
Right.
And then, but they were said oh, they're not whole, they're not full.
They've also got
they're mixed.
some mixed religion and mixed cultural things, and so it's kind of they did have an aspect where they were drawn towards some of the things from the Jewish background, but also had these other. And so, when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well,
at the well,
he's where are we supposed to worship? You guys say here. She's kind of in the middle, right? Trying to figure out what are we supposed to do. And Jesus just kind of addressed her right where she's at.
Yeah.
Right? It's about your heart and
and he goes through the whole Good Samaritan story and prompts the question, well, who's your neighbor? And it's like Jesus thought, I thought you'd never ask. The Samaritan.
So we all have social media, and part of social media that's fun. Wait,
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay,
no.
so I also wanted to state that in the Bible there was also this. A lot of people like to date back to this and say, well, what about this situation where God would actually tell His people not to marry with certain people of with this religious background, but it wasn't because of their skin color. It wasn't because of any of those things. It was because the way that they were practicing their living in their life. He didn't want His people to have anything to do with that because He wanted them to worship Him.
Right.
And I think a lot of times what happens is not only a lot of leaders have a lot to do with how people will look at stuff, but it's also the fact that people date back to when God said this and when God said that, but they don't look at the fact that God said this because He was trying to look out for people for the future.
Right.
So a lot of times it was religious background for the reasons of why people weren't allowed to marry certain people.
Yeah. Awesome. So I was going to say, on social media right now, one of the cool things about social media is that we have people from all different parts of seasons of our lives, right? And so it's like a really weird family tree that just there's uncles and aunts that you don't know you had and are a little bit crazy, but so we have all different kinds of perspectives, right, that are a part of people that follow us or that we follow. And as you guys have been on social media and kind of watching things over the last couple of weeks, what's been something that's been maybe disheartening for you as you've seen some perspectives maybe that it just kind of breaks your heart that people are going down that path maybe in the midst of this situation in this moment, maybe taking it down a path that isn't helpful or isn't bringing about something positive.
Yeah, I know for me, I think Talia and I have been like extremely vocal, on social media. And so for me going into it, as far as like what was disheartening, for me going into it, like I already knew. So I already had expectations of, all right, kind of like Adrian said, like stand up, like you're going to get it.
Yeah.
I already knew that the stance that I felt God had me to take, I've got like over 4,000 friends or something on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so like you said, all different family tree. So I already knew it. But you weigh that cost and you say, you know what, it's what God wants me to do. And this is what's best for the Samaritans,
Right.
like our now in modern day Samaritans. And so I already knew it. And so as people began to comment, like I was telling Talia earlier, I just tried to, like when it was something I thought, like, all right, here we go.
Well, let's touch on some of those areas where people are pushing back right now, saying maybe where the conversation's going away from the need for like racial reconciliation or for things to be made right in America. What are some of the things that are like that are becoming like roadblocks to that, or speed bumps that are taking it down wrong turns?
Well, I know one of the first things for me is because I had the whole Ahmaud Arbery thing, but then with George Floyd, one of the first things with me was that because I had felt like after the Arbery thing that I need to be the first one to speak up. Like I wanted to speak up before my black and brown friends. Like I want them to know immediately that this guy's for me. And so I just immediately, as soon as I saw it, I watched it, and I've done MMA and I fought judo, and I win matches by chokes. So I already know, like, you're sitting there with his head turned and his knees on the carotid artery, that you can choke me out and die. So I just immediately said something. One of the first things, of course, very common, well, you don't know what he did before.
Right.
And I just remember like blasting right back, like, hey, you know what? For me, it doesn't matter anymore what he did before.
Right.
I just watched a video with this dude with hands behind his back, so I don't care. And I even said, I don't care if he just shot somebody. You got him in handcuffs, you got him down, then you do what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Or get better training, better training so that you don't lose your anger. It's a psychology kind of thing. You don't get angry, you don't act out of anger and stuff. And so for me, that was one of the first instances on the whole George Floyd thing. And then, of course, there were that same thing again until things came out. And then, of course, once the first autopsy came out and said he didn't die from, I was like, that's crazy because, like I said, I've done judo and sambo and MMA for 35 years. You can't tell me that didn't wasn't a part of it.
Right.
But again, to me, and I recognize it in my past, that when your initial thing is, hey, what happened before that? Man, that is a true tell sign that you've got some prejudice in you.
Yep.
And you gotta recognize that.
Right.
And the only way you can recognize it because it's sin. The only way you're not going to recognize it usually with me telling you, hey, that's sin, ain't right. Like you got to ask God, like David did. Hey, search me and know me. Is there any wicked way in me? Yeah. And I think if you can humble yourself and do that, you're going to be surprised of what God shows you.
Yeah. What about you guys? What has been maybe some pushback when you've tried to stand up and make some comments that people have given?
For me, one of the comments that people would say that white privilege does not exist. That was something that would hit me hard. I would be like, whoa. But it was just that in All Lives Matter is something like, it's something that I do agree with. But when you're focusing on this right now, you can't really put, like, I know a saying has been going out where, like, if one house is on fire and all the houses in the neighborhood are not, you're not going to send the fire department to put water on all of the houses.
Right.
And what I've been noticing of that is, like, a lot of people don't think that they are privileged, but it's sad because it doesn't, a lot of people are also misguiding the fact that having privilege doesn't mean that you are, that you haven't gone through anything bad, that you haven't experienced anything horrible.
Right.
It just means that because of your skin color, there's a lot of things that are withheld from you from experiencing. And it's just, it's really insane how people still don't really believe that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, like it blows my mind.
Yeah.
And also with the All Lives Matter thing, like, again, it is a true statement, but right now, if you're looking at how this world is going, if you're looking at how our country is taking a turn to things, systematically, this has always been this way. Like, even, I remember I was talking to a teacher that I had a while ago, and they're saying how when they went to school for law enforcement, and it was taught so much, like the fact that, one, there weren't a lot of black cops, people in there running to be in law enforcement, but also saying how, like, the system with where people live, for instance, it's been designed for a long time to keep people of color or people from any other background living in a certain area. And then you have, like, the neighborhood that I live in, where there's a lot of white people, and there's a lot of older white people too that live in that neighborhood. And I definitely have not seen any black people in that neighborhood, so I know that. But that it's been designed that way for a while, and if you can't see that, it's really sad, because it's like you're already demonstrating the privilege that you have by not being able to see
Right.
these things that are happening.
Think, like, one thing that helped me put in perspective, like the Black Lives Matter, and somebody's comment, all lives matter. One thing that helped me put it in perspective was, if I think about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and can you imagine, like, if Jesus had social media, and after the Sermon on the Mount, he did hashtag blessed are the poor, and how many people would have responded back and said,
Blessed are all
no, blessed are all people.
Right.
I mean, that's exactly the same thing.
Right.
And so if you're a Christian person
Blessed are
and
those
you've
who
never got
mourn.
it,
What about the happy people?
yeah, blessed are those who mourn. No, blessed are those who are happy. But, and so I hope that clicks.
I think from talking with, like, I'm not really on social media, but with talking with people who are, what I'm hearing is, it just feels like people are quick to post without, like, they're quick to react to a comment without maybe thinking about it and either doing their own investigation first to say, like, okay, is there truth to these claims, and doing their own research to find out if this is true before responding. And I think in situations like this, I think it's better to be quick to listen.
Yeah.
And before you actually post something, because
I think I've heard something like that before.
slow to speak,
Slow to type.
quick to
Slow to post.
Because you could, by posting something, you could be doing way more damage. And it is different because the way people see social media, like, if someone who knows nowadays, but when someone posts something, like, they're not face to face with you, so you just, I think you read the comment and then you interpret it your way, and you don't know the person behind it. You don't see there's like cues that we go by, like their voice, but like how they look as well too, like when they're saying it. That all plays into how we perceive and grasp information. But I would just say, like, obviously remember how Jesus says we are to treat people. But just take your time with it. Don't be, like, especially on serious issues, don't be quick to just be like, oh, I gotta just send out something right now, because in the heat of the moment, like, you're going off your emotion, and sometimes that's not the best indicator to go by.
And sometimes we're going off of we're all giving information that we've received somewhere, and the hard thing today is that people's sources are from so many different places. And we really live in a time where people weaponize information. And so people take a statistic, and they'll hear a statistic, and they'll use that statistic as like a bomb. Like, oh, this will destroy your argument. You think that, like, that black people are disproportionately killed or hurt or gone after by the police? Well, then explain why more white people die from police officers than black people. Explain that. And that's like a really big statistic that is thrown around a lot right now.
They don't do the percentage that 13 to 20% of America is black.
Well, it's like 13%, and it's like 60% white. So
that's because most people only graduated with add, subtract, and divide. They didn't get into the algebra and stuff. Like,
but so I think when we're looking for statistics and we have that whole confirmation bias where you're looking for things that reinforce your preconceived ideas, prejudice, something that you're kind of prejudging situations on how you feel it should be. You can find that information anywhere, and that's the hard thing today.
When it comes to posting on social media, like one thing I've noticed, because there's a couple of people that stand out in my mind right now that I like them. I really love them, and like I would say, man, they're good people. Like a couple white guys, good people, great hearts, and I like them, and I know they mean well. I know they got great hearts, and they would say they're not racist,
right.
but in some of the back and forth, like I know in my heart, like, ooh, no, it's in there, man, somewhere. Yeah. And with one of them, that man he's got a great family, man. Matter of fact, his younger brother is like one of the best guys I've ever seen in my life. And but I can tell that they're posting things from what they think, what they believe is good, and what they're trying to do. But I can tell that they're not running that stuff past any black or brown people.
Right.
And so what I've done a couple of times, like once I sense that, I'm like, man, like if I wrote back like in a private message, I'm like, hey, take what you just wrote to me, and I want to challenge you to ask a black or brown person out to lunch and ask them how they feel when you say this, what you just wrote to me,
right?
What
face
you
to
just
face.
posted.
Yeah.
I want to challenge you to sit across from somebody in love. You're not trying to prove a point, but I just want you to ask them honestly to tell you how what you just said to me makes them feel. Now I just want you to listen to what they say.
Yeah.
Because I think it sounds like a lot of people, a lot of white people are posting things out of their own background and their own learning, their own education.
And things that have been true in their life experience.
Yeah. So, and they're not meaning harm.
One of those kind of comments would be something like, well, like if you don't do anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. And so, because that's been pretty much my experience. Anytime I've ever been pulled over is because I was doing something wrong, right? But then I was listening to 4 black pastors talk this week, and they were talking about one of them had moved out to Los Angeles into a more upscale area, and sending his daughter to a really nice like private school. And he said the first 2 weeks they were in that area, he got pulled over like every single day. Every single day, either taking his daughter to school or picking her up, and was asked the question like, "What are you doing here?" And like, I've never been pulled over and asked like, "What are you doing here?" Like when I'm just driving down a road or to a certain side of town. So we don't all have the same experience. I remember my friend Robin Wood told me about. He had one of his seminary professors who was like in his 80s at this point come out to he lived in kind of a gated community in Phoenix, Arizona, and the seminary professor was going to stay at his house for 2 weeks while he was on vacation somewhere else. And this 80-year-old African-American seminary professor would walk around his neighborhood, and he got the police called on him. And the police came and asked him what he was doing in that neighborhood. That's the kind of stuff that's not common in my life, in my life experience. But other people do experience that. And so we have to be careful not to say, well, this is what my experience and what normal tells me is what's really happening, because I don't know like what people of color experience in their day-to-day life.
And like for black people, like that just doesn't feel like protection, it feels like harassment. And so there's a lot of frustration and anger, and it after a while it boils up until it like explodes. And that's
let's talk about the protest for a second.
The protest, so like the way I know like people have struggled with, okay, so why do black people sort of like burn and loot their communities? Like, so the way I've seen it and processed it is that like let me like I guess tell you a story first, and this will, for some of you who are Christians, will know about the story. So so King David, he had multiple wives. So he had kids by these wives, and one of his daughters, Tamar, she has a brother named Absalom, and they're close. And Tamar ends up getting raped by her half-brother, Ammon. David finds out about it, and it just says that he's mad. Now, David is the king. He's like the ultimate judge, and he's supposed to like sort of dispense justice, and he doesn't do anything. Absalom also found out about it, and he didn't do anything because I think he was hoping that David would, since David is the king. 2 years passed by, So Absalom takes justice into his own hands, which ends up becoming revenge, and he kills his half-brother Amon. Then he goes on the run for, I think, 3 years. He goes and lives with his grandfather. So David doesn't do anything about it. Nothing. So David's second in command, Joab, kind of through some trickery, he kind of convinces David, you need to bring back your son. So David's like, you're right. So Joab goes and brings back Absalom, but David tells him, like, I don't want to see him. So he spends 2 more years in Jerusalem, and I just want to read this passage for you. So Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing his father. He wanted Joab to talk to David for him. So one day he sent a message asking Joab to come over, but Joab refused. Absalom sent another message, but Joab still refused. Finally, Absalom told his servants, Joab's barley field is right next to mine. Go set it on fire. And
Bingo.
they did. Joab went to Absalom's house and demanded, why did your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered, you didn't pay any attention when I sent for you. I want you to ask my father why he told me to come back from Gershir. I was better off there. I want to see my father now. If I'm guilty, let him kill me. Now, like, how this applies to what's going on right now is, one, I just want to say, like, the Bible doesn't condone looting. I don't condone looting.
Of course, yeah.
But I know Martin Luther King, he has a quote where he says, okay, I've always said and I will always continue to say that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. An injustice happened to Tamar, and David didn't do anything about it. So obviously Absalom did, and obviously it turned into revenge, which was the wrong thing because he took justice and he just corrupted it. Now, he goes on the run, nothing happens. Like David says he can come back, but then he doesn't see him. And it's like David is, I just want to say, like, silence to injustice isn't the answer either. I think he maybe thought silence in time would sort of like just correct it.
That old thing that time heals all wounds is
festers them.
And it didn't. And so
I don't know what dummy came up with that.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And so, like, Absalom, through all this, he's getting probably even more angrier. And he burns Joab's field because he, like he said, he wants to get his attention. And I feel like when stuff like this happens in the black community, when we've had these tragedies back to back to back, and like you see the protests, and there's probably been like articles and interviews with people, and we're saying that we're trying to bring light to an issue. Like, there is a real problem, and you're not hearing us. So, like in the George Floyd case, when this happens, it's all been boiling up, and then it explodes. And if you're not listening now, when people loot and burn stuff down, all the attention is on, okay, why is this happening? Just like Joab, he went to him, was like, why are you doing this? And then it feels like our voice is finally getting heard. But I think with black people, it's more than just we want you to hear us. We want you to, like, participate with us in helping there be long-lasting change so these incidents don't happen.
Yeah. That was really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll preach.
Yeah. That was really good. It was really good.
Absolutely.
You guys have any other thoughts along those lines? And I know, because I know that's one, I think that's one of the biggest. I agree completely with what Adrian said. I think that it's a desperation situation.
Yeah.
The thing that's I hate about it is that so much of the message gets lost in it because people just focus on the act. And the truth is that anytime there's something happening, I mean, the Miami Heat win the NBA title, and they'll burn couches and burn stuff in Miami too.
Cars.
So don't act like it's just in like these, when someone gets killed, rioting situations. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
There's a mob mentality that can happen when a bunch of people are on the streets. Things get crazy. Like, I've just seen it on college campuses, flipping over cars and stuff.
Oh yeah.
For no good reason, just like at a frat party.
Well,
So
I think what Martin Luther King Jr. was saying, and what the Bible is saying there, is that it's innate in us to be heard.
Yeah.
I mean, people have to be heard. And if ungodly people aren't heard, they're going to do ungodly things. And if godly people aren't heard, then they're going to still do godly things. You know, I mean, that's what Martin Luther King was doing.
They may even do ungodly things sometimes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's the psychology of anger that if we don't do something, something's going to be done.
Talia, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say along the lines of, I posted this video that I found, and it was of these people were protesting, and they were all singing Waymaker.
That was
awesome. Yes, it was so amazing. But what's sad is that you don't see that on the news, and that's something as godly, something as beautiful as everyone joining and singing and praising God despite this bad thing isn't heard on the news. And it's insane because I'm like, well, no wonder people are going to resort to doing this stuff. Like, no wonder people are going to do this, because if you're not going to get heard doing something that's good,
right,
then if you do something that's bad, then if the attention turns to you, then it'll work. Like
even here in Daytona, where there's been marches and protests that have been pretty peaceful, that's not covered, right? Like that's not shown on the news, especially like nationally.
That's the major majority of them.
So too, if you're looking at it like what actually gets your voice heard, it's not. And so you can see how that would lead into, well, then let's raise it up a level. If we're not being heard doing this, then let's go here. But I think that one thing we have to be really, really careful about, and we'll kind of wrap towards this end here. One of the things we have to be really careful about is not saying things like, well, there's wrong on both sides. To say that like what the police did in that situation was wrong, but now just that this situation is wrong, because what you're doing is you're basically you're discounting everything that happened before that, and you're just focusing on the ramifications or the aftermath, and pointing to that as a way as saying like we all have a part to play in this, or we're all kind of, and Kelly was driving back from Kentucky the other night, and I thought he had a great phrase that God gave him. Kelly's a preacher. Like he's a real old school preacher where he gets like these phrases, and God gave him this phrase. Why don't you tell him about what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, when I was driving home, I got to thinking, because the big thing, a couple days ago was all the rioting and the looting and stuff like that. And so I was just thinking about that, and just spending time with Jesus on that 16-hour drive. And so I started with the riot, and I felt like God said to me, well, what happened before that? And the image went in my head, oh, well, that police officer had his knee on the Floyd's neck, and like for about like 30 minutes I felt like God kept saying, well, what happened before that? Oh, Ahmaud Arbery, those two guys chasing, well, what happened before that? And like I just started going through all these scenarios with Rodney King and the injustice of the housing projects, and then the segregation, other
Jim Crow.
Yeah, I mean, like I went all the way back into the Samaritans, the Old Testament, and everything, and I just felt like, for me, like a good first step is to sincerely say, like, to my black and brown friends, like, I'm sorry, for things that my white ancestors were a part of, and they did. I wasn't there, when they were ripping families out of homes in Africa and separating them and selling them in slavery. I wasn't there, but that's my ancestry, and like when I see films and signs that say like, white people only, I mean, I hate it. And so I felt like a first step is for me, like, to tell my black and brown, brothers and sisters, like, I'm sorry for what they did. I'm also sorry for some of the things I thought, and sensed, even as a godly Christian person who was really trying to do right and trying to do good. And I felt like God gave me that whole message of being able to sorry, but also to give like my black and brown friends an opportunity to sincerely, from their heart, to be able to say, I forgive you. Because I think both sides, it's a humbling experience. And I was telling Adrian yesterday, when my son went in first grade, we'd always taught our kids, when they do something wrong, you pull them over, you say, now what do you say? And of course, your little kid says, I'm sorry. And then they walk away and it's over. But when my son was in first grade, his first grade teacher, when something happened in class, she would have the kid say, I'm sorry, but she would also have the other person say, I forgive you. And I just remember thinking, like, when my son was 6 years old, like, wow, that's a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
Like, on both sides. And I know that's not the tell all, do all, but I think for me, I feel like on the platform God's given me, that's where He wants me to start. Yeah. And for that to be a huge stepping stone revolution for a lot of people. And then, I know the first thought in people's minds, and as I was driving, I thought, God said, well, Kelly, some people are going to say that they don't need to apologize for something that they didn't do.
Right.
And instantly, God put my marriage into my mind. And God said, Kelly, you've been married 27 years. You know why? And I was like, why I've been married 27 years, God?
Paula's a good woman.
One, because she's a good woman. Two, is because when I've hurt her, not intentionally, I didn't know I hurt her. Matter of fact, I thought it was silly, and I don't even understand why she's hurt. But she says to me, Kelly, what you said, what you did, that hurt me. There's been several times, trust me, in 27 years where I've hurt her unintentionally, didn't even know it, but I apologized for it.
Yeah.
And the reason I apologized, not because I even thought I did something wrong, but because I wanted our relationship to be stronger and better. So if your first comment, when you see that hashtag white, hashtag I'm sorry, and your first thought is, like in other instances, oh, well, I'm not apologizing for anything I did, step back, Jack. Look deep into yourself, man, because it's not about that immediate thing. From somebody else's perspective,
right?
Did you do something wrong?
Yeah.
Have your ancestors did something wrong? Can that be a starting point?
Right. And it goes back to that verse I read earlier in Micah. It says that we should do justice, love mercy, walk humbly before our God. There's a humility that happens when we have to, and part of the thing that we can say we're sorry for is that if we've been born into a place of privilege and we've been called as Christians to do justice, that when we see injustice, to speak up, to stand up, to do something about it. I think one thing that I feel like sorrow about is that I've not done more in my life to help move the ball down the field when it comes to racial justice. Because if we all stepped up and just said, we're not going to take it anymore, we're done, it has to change, things would begin to change.
And there's been many times like where I've been counseling two people or two couples, and at first they say, well, I don't have anything to apologize for. There's been many times where, like, once you sit there about an hour, you start thinking of a lot of things you could have, like you just gave two examples, the systematic injustice. I mean, if we step back as white people in America, man, there are a lot of things that we can apologize for. And again, it's not tell all, do all, but man, what a great first step.
I think something that I would encourage everybody to do is take some time. I know, like, one thing I do love about this generation is that it's different than even the generation I grew up in.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like, you guys are like,
care a lot about social justice.
You guys do care about those things. You guys are, you look, and everybody's friends are different colors, and people are really sensitive to that right now. That's not enough though. Like, that's a good, that's an amazing progress we've made. But I would encourage you guys, especially for like our white students, take some time and sit down with someone, a black or brown person, and just ask them about their life. Ask them about their parents' lives. Like, what kinds of things have they experienced? Because I think that's a big part in having empathy, is when we begin to feel and try to feel and understand what others have gone through and what other people experience. And I know this about us, like, when we see it, there's a reason why things go viral, and when we see video, these things could happen all day long and we don't feel anything, we even like hearing about it. But when you see a video of someone like crying out for their life, like crying out for their mama, and just like desperate and having no way to defend or to help themselves in any way, when we see that, there's something inside of us that rises up and just says it's not right. Like, and I think that the more time we spend getting to know each other and hearing each other's stories, the more we're going to want to walk side by side and say, I want to stand up for you, like when you can't stand up for
Yeah.
yourself. And there's times in my life I need someone to stand up with me when I
Oh,
don't have the
absolutely.
ability, you know. And that's part of what it means to be a
Yeah.
follower of Christ.
And I also want to say, in respect, like, you know, obviously some people, you know, they may say no, so don't be like, oh, well, see, I tried. You just
Yeah.
got to respect that, you know, not everyone's there yet. It's hard to talk about,
Right.
you know. If like injustices have been done to people who look like you, and what that means, and processing that. And for some people, you know, like for me, like I don't really talk about stuff like that because I was listening to this podcast, and it was about racial trauma, and the lady was talking about you got to know your temperature. And for me, when I go too deep into it, you know, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and like I don't want to carry that anger and frustration around all the time because I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
It is good to talk about it, but everyone's different. You know, some people, you know, they don't want to talk about it right now, and you just got to give them space. You know, so sometimes just letting them know, hey, look, if you don't want to talk about it, just I want you to know that I'm there, and if they do, then have that like I'd say listen first, and then, you know, just ask like, well, what can I do to like help? You know, that's I think the positive thing, and that's like on the that podcast. It's called the Jude 3 Project, and they have like a YouTube channel, but it's called Racial Trauma, and they have like some things like you can do to sort of deal with this issue. But,
We can link that in the.
I was gonna say too, I would love to end with, like I said, for me, you know, I feel like a big thing to start a movement in that right direction is, you know, hashtag white, hashtag I'm sorry, for my black and brown friends to respond to that, hashtag black, hashtag I forgive you. But a stepping stone, but I would love to hear you two kind of end with, okay, because you can say you're sorry, but then if there's no action step, you know, there can be an empty apology.
Sure.
But if we start with that, then what are, like, you know, 1 and 2 action steps? What would you love to see like your white friends do or say as an action? Like, what would be like a next step after an apology? Like, what would you love to see?
Personally, for me, I'd love to see my white friends ask what I've been through when it comes to these certain things. Ask what my family has experienced, because it's harder to digest another person's story, and it's really important to do so, because then you're not only telling them I hear you, I'm listening to you, but you're also showing them you don't agree with what's happened in their life, and you're here to support them through whatever they're going to make decision-wise on these social injustices in this country.
Cool.
So yeah, and on top of that, with what Adrian said with the lady who went into the apartment, the trial, you can look it up, but the boy, the brother of the kid who died, he said openly that he forgave her.
yeah.
It was really
It's powerful.
hard to do.
Powerful.
Yeah.
If you're black, brown, going through these things, don't go and have a bitter heart to people around you, because that, regardless if they think what they did was wrong or not, you can't be bitter towards them, because people are, again, going to have a different outlook on how these things are, and God will deal with them, but for now you have to show love.
Good
And
stuff.
on that issue there, whether it's asking for forgiveness from someone or just trying to reach out and ask somebody about what's going on in their life, and maybe that you don't get a good response back,
It's okay.
that's okay. I remember we used to go feed the homeless down in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and the guy that headed up in my church, he'd done that for years and years, and we'd go down, and sometimes you would make like bologna and cheese sandwiches for all the people for breakfast, and people would be coming through line, and they complain.
I don't like no
bologna
bologna.
and cheese again. This is terrible. Like, why, you know? And I would be like kind of frustrated and be
They ain't
like,
ate for 3 days.
like, you know, like we spent all morning making this, driving down here, and like, and my friend Greg would pull me aside and be like, hey Brent, he'd be like, why'd you do it? Like, why did you come and do this? Was it just to get a thank you? Was that like the reward, or was it because like God put love for these people in your heart, and whether
good.
they give it back to you or not, you're still doing what God asked you to do. And I think that's
good.
true for like how we respond to people. And one thing too, Talia, you mentioned was that you were surprised by the number of people who have like stood up and like said something, like even in like churches where you thought maybe they wouldn't. And it's been a healthy, positive surprise to see. I think more people willing to stand up and speak out. Adrian?
I guess what I would like to see is going back to the social media. If you're on social media, I'd say, be quick to listen first, and when you see an injustice, particularly someone going after someone, to be like, hey, you shouldn't do that. That's not right. I feel like we can start there by like what we say, and just I'd say listening more too, and
Yeah.
I'd say that.
And I would say if you're listening and you're hearing people that are really hurt and angry, sometimes there's going to be some things that come out maybe that aren't super, and maybe you would look at it and say, wow, even like what you were saying is wrong. Like it's wrong for you to feel that way. I would just like caution to be really give patience and grace in those moments.
Err on the listening side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, like, you got to think, just remember Christ was about people, not about like winning arguments. So
the truth.
You got to remember when you're engaging with people online that it's not about, okay, I got to win because like that's another person. And, you have to remember that Christ died for that person too. So I think it's just being respectful, and even if you don't understand, and if you do have like questions, just like privately send them a message and say, hey, would you be willing to talk about this more? Because
Absolutely.
I don't understand where you're coming from with this, and also like sort of doing your own research too. Just don't just read an article that you agree with. Read an article that goes against what you agree with and see if there's any truth to that. Because sometimes that'll widen your perspective. I try to do that like myself. Like I was like, all right, I agree with this, and that's all right. Let me try and find something that goes against what I believe.
Well, one of the ways to do that, I think, too, is ask someone who has a different opinion
Right.
that you respect,
That's true. Yeah,
and say like, what would you like to help me understand your opinion? You got any resources I could look at?
Have conversation.
And that's that. And then you read that and read what they're, and then maybe say, would you read what I'm looking at? And then have a conversation around that, and all of a sudden, like you're making progress.
I think that for me, like my next step is to make my table, my kitchen table, more colorful. I think if you look back over 2019 and think about who all was at your house and who all you went to dinner with, and if that was all one color, we've got
That was boring.
we've got room. That's where we can grow. I mean, because I think the change outside of our home is going to happen when we change what's going on inside of our home.
Yeah.
And so, who are we having over to eat? Who are we inviting over to cook out? Who are we taking out? Going out to lunch with? And if all those people are all the same, who are we going to church with? If all those people are all the same color, then man, what a huge step. Let's change the color of our friends around us.
I would say for some of you guys too, your parents may not be as far down. They may not be as progressive racially as you are.
For the students, for sure.
You can help bring about change in your own family's life. If you hear someone in your family say something offhanded that's racist or insensitive, don't let it slide. Like call it out.
Call it out.
Say, I'm not comfortable with that. Like you can be a part of like bringing about change in your own family, and that's what we're called to do. We're called to be the light of the world, the salt of the world.
Absolutely.
Like that's what Jesus said, right? I'm not wrong on that, right? Jesus said that.
Be the light.
Yeah.
Be the salt.
We're supposed to be bringing the change, and that's the hope we have. And so that, to me, moments like this is actually, I think that like this is where students and youth are so amazing, because I think that you guys get frustrated when everybody's just telling you what not to do and all of those things to avoid in your life. But we're actually saying like, no, you have a cause to give your life to. Like Jesus said, like lose your life and you find life. Like give your life away to something bigger than yourself. And this is an issue that if you're like, oh, I don't know what any of those issues could be, this can be one of those issues. Because it's the world, it's people, it's what matters to God's heart.
I think even if you look at the history of like movements in the church, I mean, it's always happened through young people more so than anyone.
Yeah.
And even movements in general outside of church.
Yeah.
Usually always begins with the young generation. So this is the opportunity for them to shine.
Amen.
And I also want to say too, like when you're dealing with these issues and you decide, okay, I'm going to take a stand and fight against this, just realize like what you're really fighting against, and that's like sin, like racism, all these things, sexism.
Yeah.
All these things are just symptoms of like the real
Bigger
bigger
problem.
problem, which is
Absolutely.
sin. And like the reason why I frame it that way is, I was listening to this podcast where they were talking about how the younger generation is really into social justice, and their fear was that they would get burned out if they saw progress would happen, but not enough progress. It's with these issues like that we have in our world, these evils. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Like you just keep hitting and they keep popping up, and after a while you're just going to get tired and disillusioned and give up. And I remember on another podcast they were talking about how just remember, if your idea of justice is just in the here and now, that's hopeless.
Right.
Like they were saying how when Jesus comes back, that's when we'll actually see true justice, because human justice is like corrupted.
Capital J justice.
Yeah,
Right.
Human justice is corrupted. So when Jesus comes back, we'll actually see justice as it was meant to be, dispensed. Like going back to the story with Absalom, like, David was like a human king who was supposed to give justice, and he didn't do it. Like he did it for other people, but he didn't do it fairly all the time. And Jesus won't do that. He'll, like give justice fairly all the time.
Absolutely.
So that's just like, it's the end goal, but like while we're here, we're still supposed to fight for justice and fight for people who are
It's like Jesus
oppressed.
said.
Yeah.
He said, "The kingdom's here, and it's also yet to come."
Right.
Like, so it's amongst you. We're supposed to pray God's kingdom come.
We're not fighting against flesh and blood. you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
When you
thing, we're
take the
not fighting.
K out of skin, what do you got?
Sin.
Yeah.
But there is coming. But Jesus pointed to there's going to be a day though when all these things that we're fighting
all gonna be made right.
now, that it's all going to be fixed for
Amen.
once and for all, and that's the hope we have. But in the midst of it, we press on and
Right, yeah,
and
exactly.
we,
We press
and we
on. Don't
bring
give up. Keep
the
going.
light into this dark world.